All right, hello everyone. This is it's Friday. It's really cold where I am. I make no apologies for having a onesie on because I'm in my conservatory, which is even colder than the rest of my house. It's Friday, end of week 2, Lookup week, and actually this is going to be a little bit of a mashup of a few things that I wanted to cover, seeing as we've come to the end of the core fortnight that Dim and I said we would do on this series. We will still release some stuff next week at the very least. I promised him I would talk about Power Query, but I'm on a Mac today, so I'm going to save a little bit of Power Query probably for next week. But I would like to cover a few things about what you see at the end of the free workbook, and then a few specific topics. So firstly, at the end of the workbook, and I've just updated it to version 2.04 to update one of the tabs that I'm going to come on to, you'll see a bunch of other tabs on there. So I've got some value for you on functions like mod, quotient, int, round, round up, round down are all relatively similar, but notably different, I guess. Offset we've talked about. Indirect, I am going to touch on a little bit today actually, but I think Dim just covered that in such an awesome detail. I've got a tab in here on flags. So for anyone that's really inexperienced in financial modeling, I guess I would say, although it's not exclusive to financial modeling, flags, the concept of flags, of sort of turning elements of something on or off across periods, or maybe even altogether, although I'd probably call those switches, I think is really valuable to master. If you really want to master it, you should come and join Full Stack Modeler. But I wanted to talk about a few things. So number one, I've got a tab on here called Battle Focus, where I have made up a pretty rubbish game to try and showcase a few things. And then I'm going to talk to you about Excel tables briefly and named ranges briefly. And I really am just going to scratch the surface. But firstly, the Battle Focus tab. So there's a couple of things that I wanted to showcase here. I tried to make up a simple game and in the end made up a rubbish game. Basically, I made up a board. Each board square has a suit on it. Each suit has some points against it. So clubs are 10 points. You can see what it is, up to diamonds being 40 points. And the game that I even said, the exact rules don't matter. That's a rubbish game. So all I came up with was, let's say you are playing the game and you land on a position on the board like B4. So here's the board references, A to H, 1 to 8. You land on B4, and round 1 of the Excel battle game is that you have to add up all the suits, not just on the cell that you land on the board, but of all the surrounding cells as well, including the diagonals. So you'd have to add up or count all of the suits that are in that range around it. The only reason I did this was I wanted to show that when you use something like countifs or sumifs, and I only really thought this through when I saw some people doing this in the battles, you don't have to be using a range that is like a single column of data. So here actually, albeit I've manually picked this range, I'm using this square range of 9 cells as the range for countifs against this list of suits, and it's giving me the count of the suits within that range. So if you landed on E7 on the board, remember this is E7 on the board, not in cell references. E7 is here, so you'd have the countifs range around E7, link that to the suits, and that gives you the count of each of the suits in that range. And the third example I did was H1. So I thought that was quite nice, just to see that the countif range and the sumif range could be something other than a single column. Round 2 of the Excel game that I made up without any amazingly specific rules is you have to convert that range of suits into points. So what are the points associated with landing on B4 in that range? There's a few ways you could go about doing this, and I've just showcased a few of them for you. So you could use XLOOKUP, and the point I'm making here is that you've got 2 fixed references in your lookup, which are the key for the suits. but then I've not fixed the reference to the board above. And because I'm replicating the structure of the board, you can see as I copy and pasted that formula across, the reference to the cell position with the suit's going to move, but the key to the suits and the points is not. So it's quite a nice way of getting a sort of a dynamic replica of the board, but with the points on instead. And also, just with the way we have all this sort of new array functionality, you can actually do that in one cell by highlighting the whole board array as the first part of the lookup. And that's going to give you all of the points back as a single spilled array from that one cell, which I think is really nice. We could have made our lives easier, so we could have just summed that's kind of getting to the answer to the question. So what's the answers to those questions? Well, we could now use our new board to sum those ranges, or we could have made our lives easier here, and we could have just looked at the count from the suits that we had in this first section and done an XLOOKUP on the points based on that. So that's fine, but it's still very, very manual. I've got a whole table here which is actually going to give us the points based on that logic for all of the board positions. And I'm going to talk through that to the best of my ability now. The other thing I thought I'd show, which I always think is really cool with this new array functionality, is what if you just wanted to get all of the board positions? So not the cell positions, because you can see here, let's go back up. Cell or board position A1 is cell position C25 in this worksheet. What if you just wanted to get a nice grid reference of A1, B1, C1, A2, etc., etc.? Well, it's really, really easy with what we have available to us in modern Excel. You can literally just concatenate the two ranges. So I've got the range of the letters, the range of the numbers, concatenate them, and that will spill out a dynamic array with all of the board positions, which I think is awesome. So what I wanted to do then was thinking of a battle situation where you're probably going to get asked lots of different questions about different board positions. Is there a way that you could make this much more future-proofed and more of a sort of universal solution? Well, the answer is yes, and there's quite a few steps to this. And it leans on lots of the things that we have done over the last 2 weeks. So if I do a poor job of explaining this, just walk your way through each of these columns in this table here. But essentially, I start by doing two-col on the concatenated grid reference. So it's taking this grid reference with all of the positions on the board, A1, A2, A3, and it's just putting them into a list, a single column list. I'm also doing exactly the same then on the suits from the original board, which is giving me the suits in a list. I don't actually think I use that, but it's there for reference. And then what am I doing? So I'm going to split the board letter and the board number. Now, luckily, there's only ever one letter and one number, so I can use left and right on the board ref, and that's going to split them out for me. Then it gets a bit more complicated, and this leans into some of the work that Dim did in an earlier video. I'm converting the letter into its code. And then what I'm doing is I'm shifting the code. Now, what I'm trying to do here is say, okay, I can see on this worksheet that board position A1 is cell position C25. So if I wanted to go from board position to cell position for some future calculations, I'm going to have to shift the code by 2. So capital A's code is 65. I'm going to shift that 2 and then turn it back into its character, which is going to give me the grid reference in this worksheet, column C. And I do exactly the same for the row position. We're saying board number or row is 1, but actually in reality in this worksheet that is row 25. What is that giving me? It's giving me a position cell reference for every board position on my board, And that means I can start doing some really funky stuff with offset, indirect, and countifs. Now the countifs bit is just doing what I showed before above, where I'm taking the range and I'm counting the suits. Offset and indirect is the really clever bit. Indirect is looking at, let me highlight this, it's looking at the cell position. So the indirect is going to take me to the cell right smack bang in the middle of the range that I want to be counting the number of suits for. But I'm going to be using offset, and I'm going to be using the width and the height fields that I talked through, I think, yesterday. Now, if you imagine we go to cell C25, which is here, no, it's not, it's here. It's reasonably hard for me to do any height and width calculations from there with offset, because the actual range I want is there for board position A1. So what I'm doing first is I'm saying, all right, take me to that cell C25 and then shift me one column left and one row up. And then I'm going to extend that to 3 rows deep in height and 3 columns wide. So essentially, I'll try and draw this out. We're going to go to here, thanks to indirect. We're going to shift up to here, and then we're going to add the height and the width, and that's going to give us that 3x3 reference. And then, I keep pressing escape stupidly. Okay, and then that is going to allow me to do the countifs based on that 3x3 reference. And it's counting the number of each suit. I do that for each suit. I then convert the count of those suits to points. And then because this is all done in dynamic arrays, I'm using a by row, which is going to sum the value of all of these points by row. Yes, it is going to do that. I was just questioning myself because of the way that formula looks, but that is essentially looking at all 4 columns there for the different suits and adding them up. Okay, so I think that's complex, but it does touch on lots of the different features that we've covered in the last 2 weeks, and I think this is quite a typical set of steps that you would see people doing in quite a nicely broken out way in a battle. I also thought I'd touch on data tables, but very lightly, because I think Dim is going to do this in more detail. So what you've seen me do with dynamic arrays there is answer this for every single board position and answer every single step for every single board position. Now, an alternative is to just answer it for one position. So what if we just said, all right, let's take cell A1, and we'll do all of those steps that we did before. This time I don't have any dynamic arrays in there. It's just old school formulas. I don't know if we're ready to call them that yet. So we get to the same total. For A1, we've got 80 points, same as we've got here with the dynamic array. And then what I've done is I've set up a one-way data table. So the way that a one-way data table works is you pull through right at the top of the reference for the one-way data table the answer that you want the data table to return based on a set of input variables that you're going to change. And the input variable that I want to change is this board reference. So that means that I'm saying to the one-way data table, give me the answer to this set of logic, but assume that for every row of the data table, we're changing that input board reference from A1 to all of the other board positions on the grid. Now, I've already set it up, which means you get this funny array table reference. Let me get rid of it, and I'll set it up again. So I'm going to highlight the top row, including the link to the final result that I want. I'm going to highlight all of those board references on the side here. I'm going to go to data. I'm going to go to what if analysis, data table. I'm going to say that I want the column input cells. You know, what do these actually refer to in terms of the calculation and the logic? Well, it's this input here changing each time. Hit OK, and you get every single answer, essentially what we've got off the back of this huge table here, but you're just getting the answers. We could do a sense check, which I haven't done before, so hopefully this works. B4, we calculated that manually as being 240 points. B for 240 points, and just to be really sure, B for 240 points. All right, so there you go. That's a lot to cover in the first 5-10 minutes of this video. So dynamic arrays, step-by-step solutions, indirect and offset, countif and ranges, a little bit of data tables, and I'm not done yet. I also want to talk to you about Excel tables and named ranges. And again, this is going to just be a really quick intro. I used this table of data, I think, before in the Sum Product tab, but when I was going through this in Sum Product, I didn't actually have it set up as an Excel table. And that means that when you refer to these ranges within this kind of raw data set, you just get the grid references, which is okay if you're looking at the table as well. But once you start working with big models and you're jumping around tabs, that's not great. So one of the advantages of tables, if you imagine we wanted to do a little bit of sum ifs work here on the quantities sold by pie type, well, I can start referencing, and I can actually do this without looking or touching at the table at all. So I know that I've named this table data. I can use IntelliSense, the tab key, and I can build the entire formula without referencing the table or touching my mouse. So I want to pick up the quantity sold. Always remember to hit the tab key. The criteria range is going to be back in my table of data. This time it's going to be the product, and the reference, the criteria is going to be this. So I can very quickly draw out numbers. And I just think with Excel tables, the formula, if you've got a really good naming convention for your table and your fields, the formula itself is just really easy to get that quick kind of interpretation from. There's more though. So where the real value starts to jump in is again, if I was on a different worksheet, let's say I wanted to do the same thing, I don't have to jump around all the tabs within my workbook. So again, I know that I start my table names with TBL underscore. I know that the table that I want is TBL data. So I can pick that up and I can say, all right, we want to sum the quantities sold based on the table of data and the product field. And we're going to reference this. Oh, what have I done wrong? I've done something silly. We want to reference, I didn't put a sum ifs on. We want to reference the chicken pie there. There you go. Okay. So I think that's quite useful, but there's more. What if we wanted to, let's say we wanted to add a price field in here. I have got on a separate inputs tab, I've got a table with the pie types and the prices alongside it there. And I've also got 2 named ranges, which I'll come back to, but let's just stick to the prices. This becomes really easy to do nice lookups. So now I want to do an X lookup of the pie product in the row that I'm in the table on, which is why you get the @ symbol. And I want to look up my table, which I've called pies. And I'm going to be looking up the pie name. And I want to return table pies. I want to return the prices. And because it's a table, it's going to instantly assume that that formula is consistent across the whole field that I've got, and essentially that field is done. I could add a revenue field if I wanted to, which would be also quite nice. So I think tables are really useful because you can quickly reference things. They're dynamic. If I suddenly had a new pie type here, this table would extend and the reference to that prices and pies list would extend as well. Okay, named ranges. As I said, I've also got a little list. Again, I use a prefix for LST, list for months. I've got the list for the days of the week. What if I wanted to draw out some quick insights from the days of the week, the months of the year? Quite a lot of people would be going in and going, oh God, it's January, February, copy paste. Well, if you've got these set up as lists, you can just do it really quickly. So again, LST, let's say I wanted to pull out the list of months just by referencing that named range, it's going to give me the list of months. So you can imagine straight away off the back of this, if I could spell some ifs, you could now be, and this time I'll do it differently. This time I'm just going to go to the range, highlight it using Control and Shift key nicely. The criteria range will be the months of the year, and the criteria will be my dynamic array here. I can pull this out really nicely. What if I wanted to, let's do this on another tab. What if I wanted to do a two-way table quickly? So I could pull up my list of, let's pull up that didn't work. Let's pull up the days here, and then we'll put the months. I'm gonna have to transpose this. So months is there, but let's stick a transpose across it. There will be other ways you can do this as well. I love a good transpose. All right, so we've got a nice little two-way table now, and from here, I don't even have to look at the table. I can reference the table of data. I know that I want to sum my quantity sold. Range 1 is going to be back in the table of data, and it's going to be the days of the week, and the criteria will be my dynamic list there. Criteria 2 will be back in my table of data, and it's going to be the month, and the criteria will be my dynamic list of months there. Magic. So I've definitely run over 10 minutes. I think that's a huge amount to go through. I appreciate it's all quite light touch. Have a look at the workbook. Have a look at the battle focus tab. I'll even leave my rough workings that I've done there as they are in this video so that you can see them. That's all I wanted to do in this workbook for this series. So I really hope you've enjoyed kind of working through it if you've had the chance to. This is a very, very small cut of the training that we do at Full Stack individually as a community. So check out the website, fullstackmodeler.com, if you're interested in joining us. I run boot camps on this. I'm doing one at the moment on Power Query and dynamic arrays and real world case study application for finance professionals. And it would be great to see some of you join us. Next week, I think we're going to bring some people in. So we've got some very good competitors for the battles in the Full Stack community, outside the Full Stack community. Dim and I are going to get together over the weekend virtually, and we'll figure out what else we can bring you that we think adds a lot of value. All right, see you next week.